can just start as an editor-in-chief. As said before, I'm extremely happy and honored that you provided conceptually dense texts, which are not just texts. To refer to Marina, it's like a dossier, Necrocapitalism, War, Colonialism, and Latin America. But I would like now to give the floor to Professor Marina Gržinić, who edited the whole number for this journal. Again, thank you for your invaluable contributions. So, Marina, the floor is yours now.
Yeah. Thank you, Nina, and first welcome you all. The idea of this coming together is a short or little bit longer discussion on your contributions for the collection of texts that we published in the Journal of Philosophy, Psychology, that is have the name Anthropos. And the title of the collection of texts, it's exactly 6 texts. It's Necrocapitalism, War, Colonialism, Latin America. Just initially, I would like to thank Professor Antonio Fuentes Díaz. Without his support, his working on having together your contribution, this will not be possible. And also, I would like very much to thank the support of Professor Natalia de Marinis. Both are key for the possibility for us to publish as an open source your texts. Important is this open source because the analysis, as it was said, that you provide, it's very difficult to get them in Central Europe or in Europe in general, because Slovenia, where we published the magazine, is European Union. And we are really centrally situated near Vienna. Now, it's important also regarding that those who read, and generation matters, are younger people who are interested in certain topics, but has to be motivated, but also academics. The decision came in talking with Nina Cvar that will be important to make like some kind of academic channel in which we briefly present what is published. And also there, that is the possibility, publish the way how to access all this open source text, and also make us in relation, seeing each other, though coming from diametrically different points in the world. But as we could see through your analysis, the way how you mark your way of thinking about Latin America specific states, we see that what you almost like a premonitory sign expose in your work is coming sometimes much more faster than we think in the European context, if we think about Europe. But we live in a global world, so all what you develop sooner or later, though it seems is in Latin America, it's coming to the center, and vice versa. Here is getting another way or another format. What is central, maybe before I will ask you to talk about your contribution, it's that the way how you also framed before Panagiotis Doulos said the extreme proportion of violence that works with capitalism and also with the features of necropolitics on one side, and on the other side, through your analysis, first you develop a very clear ways of how to struggle against, because it's theory, it's a critical discourse, but is also a very important struggle for rights and justice. And also in your analysis, you put very visible communities in Latin America, indigenous communities, part of civil society, and so on, that also stay against extractivism, feminicide, criminal economies, drug trafficking, and so on. Maybe one thing that is important to just expose for you how your analysis and your vocabularies works in the European context. It's precisely the word that is notion, but is not only a notion. It's something that describes and talks about feminicide. In the European context, feminicide is absolutely not used. The structural level of feminicide that you expose, this violence and killings that is gender-based, connected with state apparatuses, it's not part of the agenda. Truly, it's not part. The word that is used is femicide. And just that you bring feminicide and you show something that now is seen private. Violence in the intimate space is femicide. But we know that feminicide was used in the Srebrenica genocide in the 90s, and it was never recognized as such. This word was not applied because we didn't have this word, because you actually brought this and others who works maybe not in the center in which femicide appear every day, and it seems something that has nothing to do with the structure of the state. So, saying this, I think we can be very free and think and work and think loudly and develop onto your text. And I would like us to start this talk inviting Antonio Fuentes Díaz and Panagiotis Doulos, because we also open the Anthropos journal with their text that has the title Economy of Death, the Gray Zone, Cannibal War Machine, and Capitalist Accumulation in Latin America.
The violence in Latin America has many names. It was like cartels, criminal economy, criminal organizations, etc. But we, after many years, no, 2-3 years of discussions, we decide to take a different route. And this route is about to think, what if if all these criminal organizations, suppose it's not anomaly, but it's the canon of capitalist accumulation. Because every literature describe this organization like enterprises, but ignore the fact what is the political implication of that. In that sense, we take a route to think that this enterprise is not only another form of capital, as Covarrubias argue, but actually it's the most cruel crude expression of the logic of value. And that is important because if we think like that, this this criminal capital, the thing that does is to realize the inherent the dynamic of capitalist accumulation, but without the ideological and the humanitarian discourse of liberal ideology. In that sense, said it more simply, the criminal capital, sorry, realizes the inherent logic of capital, money for more money. And as Marx argued in his epoch, this tendency of capital is a tendency to break every barrier in its way to accumulate abstract wealth. That was the one part. And the one part that we take after this form, that we say that the conceptual core of a commodity is nothingness. The commodity doesn't realize a meaning. On the contrary, in its movement is a movement of nothingness that not only nullifies the social meaning, but also nullifies the individuality. In that sense, we, the human beings, become the objects of a destructive dynamic. In that sense, we want to make a cycle of the argument. We argue that this nihilistic dynamic of capital, it means a violence without boundaries. If we say, like Trejolet and others, that the problem is a weak state, that means the first consequence is to demand a strong state. That is a neoliberal perspective. I will come later because what means this adynomy. And the other consequences is, if we see as a form of capital, as an extreme form of capital, that means the criminal capital participates in the global flows of social total value. And that means that the states, not only they cannot eradicate these types of capital, they don't want to. If they come to eradicate these forms of capital that has a great participation in global economy, that would mean a financial crisis we never saw. We would mean collapse of the bank system, collapse of the local economies, etc. In that sense, now, because I have passed 1 year that come all this discourse, the war on drugs, we can see that this falsehood about this discourse, because if they eradicate, they collapse the bank system. They cannot, they can't do. And it is part of our argument that that discourse became ideological to construct an abstract enemy. Based on this discourse, is to construct an abstract enemy to legitimize the state of exception. It also justifies this dynamic, the state to use extreme violence to regain the control of territories, and reinitiates process of primitive accumulations. Said in other words, if the criminal didn't exist, the state must invent it. for me, it's important because I'm coming for a context in Greece, in Europe. The delinquent is the same abstract figure as a terrorist. Is the same figure that legitimizes the actualization of the state technologies of violence. In all this is liberal discourse. That is the problem in our perspective, that if we don't realize a critic of political economy, we don't see all this aspect. Also, we don't see that all this criminal capital, because another form capital also transforms itself. It transforms, it takes the form of a neoliberal enterprise. That means decentralized form. It means it acquires flexible forms, flexible accumulations, and also take the form that is not centered in one territorialized place, but it's decentralized as the form of the global enterprises in this global capitalism. In that sense, our critique is, we must see that this form of violence, this extreme form of violence, corresponds other form of capital, and its logic of accumulations. And it's a cycle, because it's important that if this extreme form of accumulation needs a new Luben proletariat that is a disposable body, that is not away from the context of the neoliberal configuration, because the last 30 or 40 years, neoliberalism constitutes the subjectivity as industrial reserve army, and at the same time as a killable body. And these bodies are the bodies that will come to exploit to death from these enterprises. In that sense, we see a vicious circle that every sphere aliments the other. And to make I talk a lot, to make a first conclusions, for our, it's important because it seems like a type of autonomy that many say that the state has lost in Latin America the monopoly of legitimate use of violence. And they say they don't work. The Weberian term doesn't work. But they forgot one significant detail, that in Weber, this definition is an ideal type, not a real one. And the other one is, if we see the state as a machine also, that as a form of capitalist relation that has to guarantee the accumulation of capital, it's not contradiction. The states in America, Latin America, is not dysfunctional, or the contrary. When are they functional? When they come to eliminate the social struggles, they're very, very functional to put the order and destroy territories for extractivistic activities of capital, etc. In that sense, we can say that all this hybrid governance is not anomaly. It's part of the necrotic expansion of value, and we ask ourselves that actually it's the modern paradigm of modern geopolitics. In that sense, form of extortions is, Tony will talk about that. It's not it's part of the strategies for the accumulation of capital. It's not an anomaly. And to close this argument, our need is to explain all this extreme form of violence beyond unmoralistic argument and see how in its core it's nihilistic, and not only nihilistic, is a violence that break every barrier, moral and social barrier, in order to accumulate abstract wealth.
First of all, I would like to thank Marina for the invitation to propose a dossier for Anthropos. Would like to thank my colleague, Dr. Natalia Di Marinis, and to the colleagues who contributed the dossier, Professor Lia Rocha and Professor Monique Carvalho. Thanks to participate in this dossier. So I prepared my presentation for being more accurate. So the article, the name of Economy of Death, Grey Zones and Cannibal War Machine in Latin America. We write with Professor Panagiotis. And the central question of this article is how do organized crime and capitalist accumulation intertwine? So for the past 40 years, Latin America has witnessed new patterns of violence which, unlike the political violence of the military dictatorships of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, can be regarded as less politicized and more economically driven. This violence is sustained within a context of persistent inequality and social exclusion, marked by the presence of a plurality of violent actors. It's a new way. There are a plurality of violent actors who operate according to a logic of profitability based on resources extraction, and whose activities are embedded in the broader transformations of labor and of global capitalism. The central argument of this article is that the proliferation of violent actors linked to organized crime should not be seen as a marginal external phenomenon to capitalism, but a fundamental component of contemporary process of capital accumulation. To address this, the text introduces the notion of economy of death and develops the categories of gray zones and cannibal war machine to explain how criminal dynamics, far from being anomalies, reproduce and intensify the logic of value characteristic of neoliberalism. The article's main contribution lies in showing that crime, through practices such as extortion and hybrid governance, becomes fully integrated into global circuits of accumulation, generating a regime of violence and dispossession that redefine the relationships between state, communities, and the market. This is the focus of this article. How is that's a start. In the Mexican case, the trafficking of illegal substances changed its operational form in the late 80s and early 90s to, among other factors, to the regulation of economic sectors previously controlled by the states, including criminal enterprises. The signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, in 1994 further transformed the functioning of drug trafficking. This change helped explain the transition from the traditional profile of drug cartels to global, diversified corporations competing for specific market niches. Such transformations enable the consolidation of groups that generate profits beyond drug traffic, expanding into a wide range of criminal activities like kidnapping, illegal lodging, mineral extraction, fuel and gas theft, human traffic, migrant smuggling, and forced labor. These practices created environments conducive to resource extraction and drove the struggle for the territorial control to commercialize and circulate illicit commodities, alongside the adoption of predatory behaviors to achieve such control. This shift generates a more violent and nihilistic pattern of accumulation. Criminal governance, okay. This process produced forms of territorial control in dispute or negotiation with the state. The logic of accumulation requires the use of illegal practices as profitable resources employed by a variety of actors, not only criminals, thus configuring networks of complicity among the state, business elites, and organized crime. These networks operate across different territorial scales and with varying degrees of influence in formal government structures, articulating state institutions, political parties, de facto powers, and economic elites. This generates ambiguous zone between state and crime, where the legal and illegal activities merge, a phenomenon conceptualized as hybrid or criminal governance. These mechanisms of territorial and social control exercised by criminal groups combine coercion with forms of consensus directed toward the communities in which they operate. Such processes configure shared sovereignties and hybrid institutions that blur the boundaries between state and crime. And this is other focus central of this article. Extortion as rent. A growing phenomenon within the diversification of criminal activities is extortion. Extortion can be understood as the appropriation of profits by actors who do not participate in the productive cycle in which they intervene. In this case, criminal groups. For this reason, extortion may be conceptualized as a form of extortionate rent, which, as noted by Professors Lia Rocha, Professor Monique Carvalho, Professor Bassoni, takes the form of parasitic entrepreneurship. This is a mode of management by criminal groups that deploy violence, whether generalized or targeted, to ensure the collection of taxes on a wide range of economic activities, including monopolizing the provision of services and goods. Extortion has become the most widespread and quotidian mechanisms of value extraction, functioning in a manner similar to state taxation. For these forms, criminal capitalists operate, they must intertwine with fractions of legal capital, for instance, through the international financial system via money laundering. This relationship, which we call in this article a gray zone, de facto blurs the artificial distinction between legal and illegal activities and patterns of predatory accumulation, expanding gray zones and generating microcriminal networks structured around profitability. This form of appropriation is not an anomaly, like said Professor Panagiotis, or an externality in the production of profit, but rather an operative form of predatory accumulation of capital, reinvesting in both the circuits of the legal and financial economy and in the maintenance of armed groups themselves. Extortionate rent, therefore, is intimately linked to the production of order and to criminal governance. Finally, to wrap up, we can argue that based on the reflections and the research developed in this article on violence in Mexico and other Latin American countries, it becomes evident that there is an articulation between state structures, organized crime, and global capitalism, generating a regime of structural violence. Extortion, illicit economies, and gray zone are shown to be essential mechanisms of accumulation, while cannibal war machines emerge as a central political and economic actor. The text lies in its rejection of the idea that criminality is a desviation of pathology. Instead, it's presented as the most crude and nihilistic expression of capitalist value logic. Okay.
So I would like, as I ask Antonio Fuentes Díaz and Panagiotis Doulos, maybe you can introduce yourself in terms of the context of your universities that is important, or what you think it's important to say, and then to give us the idea or points that you would like to expose about your text, your analysis that is published in Anthropos.
So, hello everyone. I'm Lia Rocha, or Lia de Mattos Rocha, and I'm here with my colleague Monique Carvalho. We are both from the State University of Rio de Janeiro, and we work together in this research group called Cities. And Jonathan also is part of our research group, and we've been working together for the last 15 years about favelas, associativism, and how they are crossed by the violence dynamics and the state violence dynamics. But in this project, we were especially interested in producing some kind of understanding about the impacts of territorial control by armed groups on the ordinary life of favelas and outskirt dwellers. And it's a pleasure to be here and exchanging with you. Thank you very much, Marina and Antonio and Nina, for the invitation, because it's not something that we are very familiar with, because we are working with these armed groups called militias. It's not something new in Rio de Janeiro in terms of crime, but as a research subject, it's something relatively new, and it provokes in us a lot of ideas and hypotheses of how it's different and how it proposes a new way of thinking about state, crime, and territories in Rio de Janeiro. Because militias, they are defined in terms of legal and political, but also sociological terms. It is defined by its relation with the state. So many of these militias members, they are members of the armed forces or former member of armed forces. And it's intrinsically connected to the state, and also the interests in terms of how we organize the urban space, how we think about public policies for territories and the population, etc. So it's new for us in terms of understanding and producing some kind of understanding and comprehension about these new connections between crime, politics, states, and territories. Monique and I, we were involved for the last 10 years at least in this research agenda about militarization. Rio de Janeiro was the place, locus of many sports mega events, and it comes with a lot of militarization in terms of increase in public security budget, using using the military in the ordinary police routine of the city, but also in terms of the mentality and morality that that's engaged in this militarism. We had a lot of hard times lately with our former president, which is known to be extremist right wing, and a former member himself, a former member of the armored forces, and all this ideology about militarism and authoritarianism and the necessity of a strong state in terms of fighting urban criminality, etc. It's very strong in Brazil in the last 10 years, but very strong in Rio de Janeiro specifically. And in this agenda, in this research agenda about militarization, we were interested in thinking about militarization, not only about the presence of the armored force in the civil life, but also as a type of government, a type of social order, some strong force that's organizing society and organizing politics and organizing ordinary life, but also organizing economy and economic life. And to think about militarization as a type of government is also to think about how it updates colonialism and how Brazil was organized politically and also socially and economically in the last 500 years. So we are talking about militias that they have this kind of territorial control, that they control and exploit the land and the population. So we are talking about land always, né? Panagiotis and Antonio talked about primitive accumulation, original accumulation. Rio de Janeiro is a good case to think about. We're talking about land, we're talking about the ownership of land, and we're talking about exploiting land and its resources and its population through extortion. And for us, it's clearly an update of colonialistic ways of government. A case that is very famous in Rio de Janeiro and in Brazil, it's the case of the murder of the municipal representative Marielle Franco. She was murdered by a man. We are still investigating, but the convicted murder is, he explained that he was offered land to exploit in exchange for killing her. And he said, it's not something that you don't accept. It's not something that you pass. It's an offer you cannot pass. So when he said that he was offered a land to explore together with its population, and for us, it's clearly how Brazil was colonized in the beginning. So we are interested in thinking about the effects of this type of government in ordinary life. Our research, it's ethnographic research with an ethnographical approach. So interested in how it's irrigating and influencing ordinary life, everyday life of favelas and outskirts dwellers, but it also helps us understand the changes in the political and economical scenario of Rio de Janeiro and Brazil because of these connections between militias and the institutional politics.
Is very new for us, but also is something that is waiting to us as a future. No, these elements of criminal violence and organizing the civil aspect of that favelas, practically what they need, they get.
Yeah. So one point that is new for us is because we are used to doing research on associativism and social movements in favelas, and it's a very strong tradition of self-organizing and struggling and fighting for rights, etc. And we have this motto here that the favela remained after all these attempts to evict the residents, and the resistance of favelas dwellers, favelados, is very strong and important. But what we think it's new with the militias is that some of the militias members, they are also political leaders because they are these mediators between the community and the state. So they have this political capital of doing this mediation because they are mediators between crime and state, crime and politics, and also between territory and the institutional political organization. So for us, it's hard to make typologies. We try to in our article, and we are working on a new one more specifically about the political impacts of militias and militarization. But it's hard to think about this typology because sometimes we wonder if we can even label some of these leaders as grassroots leaders, because they are also, for the last 20, 30 years, the political lord of the territory. But I also think, Marina, that when we started our research, we were just living the hard moment of the pandemic in Rio de Janeiro. And it was very difficult for us to understand living conditions of a population that was so sacrificed during the pandemic, especially in Brazil with our former president. And for us, the idea of this parasitarian power that was sucking the life out of people and exploiting them more than they were already exploited through their whole life. And we're talking about overcharging them for services as light, as internet, as gas. It's a level of exploitment that is huge. It's like over exploitment. We don't have a word because exploitment is exploitation, né? But we're talking about the over exploitation, and that's when we started this idea of this parasitism, this parasitarian political and social force and social order in these territories. But at the same time, it's important to stress that favelas, they are not ghettos, and they have a lot of resistance and a lot of social movements and organizations. And we are trying to identify the strategies that these groups are using to resist and to survive and to re-exist every day. But there's something here that's going on that it's not all how can I say, in Portuguese we have the saying, it's all dominated, it's all controlled. We're not talking about something that's completely controlled. There is some kind of resistance, but it's hard, and we are trying to refine our tools to understand what's the resistance, what's the possibilities for resistance. But I don't know if Monique agrees with me, but in terms of this civical life, I think that's where we found the most differences between this traditional type of armed control that's from factions that are drug dealers, dealers of illegal drugs, and this crime that's more unorganized in terms of the territory, and some of them have a relation with the territory and its dwellers and inhabitants that goes many years ago. But militias is something different in terms of this civical life and how they suffocate all the possibilities of a political grassroots communitarian life. But it's also, what I think it's most striking is that this is not something that happens in favelas and outskirts in Rio de Janeiro. We are talking about the governor of the state, who has well-known relations with these groups. We are talking about our former president. So to think about how these groups and interests and forces are inside the whole institutional building of Brazil, it's important. It's not something that happens in this peripheries and territories and margins. It's something that's happening in the heart of the political life of Brazil. And for us, it has very much to do with this idea of parasitism and parasitical entrepreneurship. Because when we were under the pandemic, Bolsonaro, and we had this idea, this campaign for people staying at home and social isolation and etc. But Bolsonaro, our former president, repeatedly said, some people are going to die. That's happening. That's life. I'm sorry, but that's life. People are going to die. We cannot stop economy. We cannot stop the country. We cannot stop development. Some people are going to die. It's life. This idea that making money, making progress, making development, exploiting and accumulating capital, etc., it's more important. It needs to happen regardless of people's lives, people's security, people's dignity. It's something that helps to, in terms of ideology, to legitimate this kind of government that we are calling militarization. Because it's part of this militarism morality to think that the strong will survive and the weak will perish, and that's life. So I'm not sure if I'm bringing optimistic information to think about comparisons between Latin America and Europe, but I think that the violence, it's proportional to the level of exploitation and economic oppression that the poor and the minorities and the refugees are living.
Let's continue talking and publishing together.